And the very first thing we're going to take a look at is the assignment B. You might remember this is where you were creating a form where you could have an image Pac-Man move around the screen in response to a click. So if you moved around the form with your mouse and clicked, the image Pac-Man should move to the new location and give you the coordinates for that location. So you'll also notice that I've put a few pieces of information on here. I drew the scale height to show what it is. I drew the scale width, and here you have the name for the form, and you have the name of the property. Here we've got the Pac-Man with its property height and property width labeled. So if I click somewhere, notice how our Pac-Man moves, and you also are told the X and Y coordinates. So 420 is where I clicked, 420 for the X coordinate, and 2100 for the Y coordinate. So if I go further to the right, you should see it moving. You should see that X coordinate changing. So you'll notice the X coordinates 315, 150, and as I go to the right, again 915, 1725, 2520, it keeps going up. And you should also see something similar happen to the Y coordinate as I go up. Notice how the Y coordinate decreases, 780, 300, 130 something, 90, and if we go down 1215, 2625, 3990. This is what I was looking for. So there's two things happening. First, the Pac-Man is redrawn in a new location, and then the coordinates are printed. This was simply an exercise to get you used to responding to a new type of event. This is the code that goes with it. I created a mouse down event handler for the form. And what it does is it clears the screen. It then tells the form, I want you to start printing at this X and this Y location. I also print the information. By the way, notice how I'm using space 10 to bump it over to the right so that when I move the Pac-Man to that location, it doesn't hide the coordinate that I printed. So that was that in a nutshell. You can look at this code, replicate it. Primarily here, I wanted you to get familiar with it. Here is C. I titled this one ICS20 Tasks to Do for Today, I think. And the idea was to get Andy to move. So here we have Andy, a cartoon character, and 4 buttons that each are supposed to move Andy in a specific direction, and then a 5th button which is supposed to make Andy move by himself. So let's see if they work. I used WASD since that's our standard for moving things up and down, left and right. So yes, Andy is going up, down, left, and right. This worked nicely. Now for the move button. Let's confirm that it works. Hey, it works. Andy gets teleported back to the left side of the form and then moves somewhere to the middle of the form. So let's try it again, and it works. Now let's take a quick look at the code for that. So if we start with our objects, let me double click on up and we'll take a look at up for you. So here we have the event procedure for up, and you'll notice a few things. First, we change Andy's current X or Y coordinate. And that's what we're doing right here where I'm drawing my box. Image Andy.top subtract 50. It means that you move Andy up by 50 units. We're not changing image Andy.left, we're leaving it as is. So wherever Andy happens to be for the X coordinate, that's where Andy stays. And that was for up. Notice how down is the exact same as up, except instead of subtracting 50, we are adding 50. Left and right are even simpler. So the left event procedure, all we are doing is modifying Andy's current left position. We're taking away 50 units. We're moving him to the left. And then, of course, to go to the right, we simply add 50 units. So that's it in a nutshell. The move routine, still fairly straightforward. I'm moving Andy from left to right. And notice how I'm only modifying the x coordinate. And in this case, rather than worrying about where Andy is right now, I am simply saying, go to this particular spot. And I'm starting from 0, and I'm going to 2,000 units. And each time through this loop, I go just a little bit farther to the right. So if Andy is right here, each time he goes just a teensy little bit farther to the right every time through until he reaches his final destination. Now, if I wanted to modify this, so instead of going to an arbitrary number, I go to the right-hand side of the form, well, I can still pick an arbitrary number. So let's take a look at my form. So 2,000, let's see where that takes me. About halfway. So if I went to 4,000, I imagine I could get to the right-hand side of the form. So let's try 4,000. Yeah, I pretty much get to the right side of the form. But if I wanted to be a little neater, instead of just going to 4,000, I'm going to take my form and move Andy to the scale width. Let's see what happens. So this dimension is scale width, and I am telling Andy to go from 0 all the way to scale width here on the right. And let's see what happens. Andy left the screen. But if we reveal the right side of the screen, notice how Andy is hiding there. It was quite simple. Andy went just a little bit too far. So let's try that once again. Move. We want Andy to stop here, which means we need to take away, so let's see. So we want Andy to be shown here and not where he is now, which means we need to take away his width from our final destination. Yes. So subtract image Andy.width. And this should take us right to the edge of the screen. Yeah, it takes away his width. Now let me make the screen a little wider and try it again. And if we did things right, he stops at the very edge of the screen again. That's for width. You can do something very similar for height. Instead of doing X, you're modifying Y. And that requires you to do a few other things. Instead of scale width, what are we doing? Scale height. And instead of taking away Andy's width, what would you take away? Andy's height. And we can leave everything else the same. We can keep step 0.01. One thing that we would want to do is make sure that Andy stays at his current X coordinate. So image Andy dot left. That's his X coordinate. We leave that alone. And then we modify his Y. We set his Y to the new value. And I also need to dim my Y as a single. Let's try it now. Move. Whoops. And classic mistake. He goes to the bottom. Let's move the window down, or the form, let's make it bigger. And he stops neatly at the edge. Now, let's try to go from bottom to top. Fairly straightforward. We simply need to switch these two values. And we need to make sure that the step is counting in the right direction. So if we're trying to go to the top of the screen, we are going to try to make the value smaller, which means we have a negative step. So first thing to do is swap these. We want Andy to start at the bottom, and we want him to go to the very top. Notice how I'm not worrying about taking away his height from the top, and I need to make the step negative. Let's try it now. Andy goes up. And if we resize the window, it should still honor the size. Yes, it does. And then, of course, let's confirm that we can do this with X as well. So we switch back to X and scale width, image Andy.width. And we can keep the step negative because we are going from the far right to the origin. And we also need to modify our X. And we are no longer modifying Y, so we can leave that out, but we are modifying X. And let's do that again. Notice how Andy appears on the form. He doesn't appear coming from the right edge. And if we resize the form, it responds. So if you would like to have Andy move around the screen, let's say move in this direction and then return back, you would simply need to have 4 separate for next loops, back to back to back, each doing that separate movement. So first you'd move to the left, then you'd move up, then you'd move to the right, and then you'd move down.